Okay. So I want to welcome everybody. For those of you who have never attended training before, and I do know that there are a bunch of you who this is your first time, I want to introduce myself. My name is Sandy Cormack. I've been working with the WIOA partners here for about 5 years. And this is, I believe, the third full year that we've been doing these training sessions. This is the 9th training session that we've done. I'm going to talk a little bit about the prior training sessions that we've done before. But the way that this works is I had you take a personality assessment. We're going to go over that a little bit. I'm going to strongly recommend that on your own, you read through the report from your personality assessment. And then I'm going to give you the opportunity, if you'd like to do a one-on-one discussion about your results at a later time, we can do that. But I'm going to use that as an instructional tool today. In a couple parts of the presentation, so we won't be going into that much depth. And then as well, I gave you a student manual and recommended that you print that out. I hope you did. That's really good for taking notes and stuff. And there's at least one activity that requires you to sort of fill out a form there. We're doing this in the form of two 2.5-hour sessions. The first is today, the second is next Friday. And as I said, this is going to be recorded. I'm recording it now, and then I'm going to put it up on our YouTube channel. And so you'll be able to refer to it in the future and also refer other coworkers to it. We've been recording these now for a couple years. There's a small library now of our training videos online for anyone to use. So, and I'm actually going to be referring you to a couple of those training sessions as we go on here. So one of the characteristics of our training is that even though you know this might be your first time, these are all standalone training sessions, but they do build off of one another to some extent. So here are a few of the training sessions that we've done before. The power of questions. We learned about different ways to ask questions really effectively and build your communication skills. We've done this a couple times. We've done a couple of sessions on creative thinking and innovation. That's a very popular course. We did one on mastering the art of customer service. We did that one last year. And also emotional intelligence we did last year. And the last training that we did was mastering the art of conflict management and resolution.
I haven't found my pills and I don't know where they are.
Could you guys mute? Laura, could you mute there?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. The thing about these training workshops is that they all tend to sort of overlap one another in some aspects. In conflict management and resolution and in emotional intelligence, you see that there are also, they also deal with communication skills and problem solving. And in managing and in giving customer service, the same thing, communication skills, emotional intelligence, conflict resolution. So all of these things that we have done before are also feeding into this dealing with difficult people. As a matter of fact, I would call the dealing with difficult people workshop sort of a subset or a more focused application of the mastering the art of conflict management and resolution. So one of the things I'm going to recommend that you do is use both the mastering the art of conflict management and resolution and the emotional intelligence workshops as sort of extended reading to go on and learn from those. And it'll help you a whole lot with some of the things that we're going to be working with today. And this is what I'm planning on covering today. I give you the whole workbook because I want you to have that as a reference tool. But it's an 8-hour workshop, and I condensed that down into 5 hours. So based on what we've covered before and what I think is really important, I've decided that what we're going to work on today are sessions 2, 3, 4, and 7. We're not going to do emotional intelligence because we did a whole workshop on that. And I'm going to reference that for you guys. I'm going to recommend that you take a look at that. And I can even send out the workbook for emotional intelligence for you to look at in between. And then session 6 on getting focused. These are things also that you can look at in the workbooks on your own as well. I want you to keep the workbook and use it as a reference tool even after we're done, because there's a lot of good information in there. And here's what we're going to try to learn over the course of these next 2 Fridays. First of all, we're going to focus on how your own attitudes and actions and behaviors affect others, and how that when you're dealing with difficult people in a conflict situation, what you bring to the conflict yourself, as well as what they bring to the conflict. We're going to learn some new and effective techniques for dealing with difficult people. We're going to learn techniques for managing and dealing with your anger. And we're going to develop some coping strategies for dealing with difficult people in difficult situations. I have built this as a very interactive workshop. So I'm going to be prompting you. There's going to be some discussion points during the workshop. I'm going to want you to contribute, to unmute and actually contribute, and then so that we can discuss some of the things here. So I encourage your robust participation as we go through. So let's start with session 2, which is conflict as communication. So we're going to talk a little bit about conflict and the different types of conflict. And this is the section that we're going to start talking about the DISC Plus report that you got. And I'm going to talk a little bit about behavioral principles, because behavior is a prime cause of conflict. And we're going to learn about how our behaviors can sort of naturally create opportunities for conflict, and hopefully learn how to diffuse some of those situations. Conflict in general is a very normal part of healthy relationships. Even if you get along with everyone easily, conflict is bound to come up in certain situations. So what's really important is to learn how to manage disagreements so that they don't harm relationships. And I like to talk about conflict in terms of 2 components. One is inner conflict. This is your personal reaction to a situation or a decision. You bring a certain, you contribute to conflict situations because of your personal reaction. But then there's also the interpersonal conflict, which is conflict between one or more people. And that's what we're going to focus on in this session. So let's start talking about the DISC Plus. I hope everybody's had an opportunity to go through the report. The DISC Plus comes in 2 parts. It has a behavioral component called the DISC, and a motivational component called the values index. It looks at how you behave and what motivates you, what inspires you, what drives you. And for our workshop today, we're going to focus on the behavioral components, which is the first section, the DISC. And I'm going to give you a very quick overview. Some of you have seen this before because you've taken the DISC previously with me, and we've gone over this before. If I was doing a DISC Plus workshop, we might just spend 4 hours on that alone. But what we're going to be able to do today is a very quick overview. The DISC has 4 elements in it, 4 components, 4 dimensions. It looks at problems, people, pace, and procedures. So let's go through these one at a time. The D in DISC stands for decisive, and it looks at how you tend to approach problems and make decisions. So when I'm coaching somebody with a high D score, what I usually find is that they tend to be very demanding and driving and forceful. This table here, I believe it's on page 8 of your report. I call it the DISC Plus cheat sheet, and it's really good to have to go back to understand the different dimensions and to sort of see where you are on that continuum there. High D people tend to make decisions very quickly. And in doing so, they can often display an emotion of anger, as if they are angry that they have to deal with this problem, and they just want to push through the problem. So they don't take a lot of time to examine the problem. They can come up with very quick solutions, and then when I just get through the problem, implement the solution so that they can move on. A person with a lower D score, down here at the bottom, you see, they're more methodical. They are more deliberate. They'd like to study the problem before they make a decision. So they might want to collect facts and data. They might want to talk to people. And it might be a while before they're comfortable in making a recommendation or making a decision. So that's the D. In of itself, the nature of the D can be a catalyst for conflict. The next dimension here is interactive. It looks to how you basically interact with others and share your opinions. So this one is the most associated with something you're probably familiar with, the difference between extroversion and introversion. High I people tend to be more extroverted. They're gregarious and persuasive and inspiring and enthusiastic. They might be the first person who you notice in a meeting because they'll be making small talk. They like to talk and participate and discuss things in a meeting setting. People with a lower D score are more reflective and reserved and introspective. They might not say a thing during the meeting. They might be listening. They might be thinking. It might take a few people talking before they're comfortable in participating themselves, and they might not ever participate. They might be collecting information and thinking about things, and then when they go off by themselves, they you might hear from them after that, after they've had a chance to process it. They might send you an email. When I'm facilitating a group, I like to have this type of information about the participants. I like to know whether they're high I or low I, so that I know who during the meeting I'm going to need to prompt. Somebody who's not being heard, who it can be very valuable to hear their opinion. If I know this about them, I might be more aware that I'm going to have to ask them directly, what do you think about this, before but people with the higher I don't have to worry about it because they're going to be leading the discussion. The third dimension here is stabilizing, and it actually looks at 3 things. Pace is one of them. It's how you tend to pace things in your environment. So this is counterintuitive, but high S is associated with a slower paced environment. They are more patient and predictable and passive. They like things to occur at a slower pace. We also associate the S dimension, the stabilizing dimension, with your desire and your need to be in a harmonious team environment. So people with high S scores, they like to be part of a team. They like to be part of a team. They like to be with a group of people that they can work with. And they also like for that team environment to be harmonious. They like to get along and work together well. People with a lower S score, along with being more open to a faster paced environment have a lot greater tolerance for conflict. They tend to be more loners. They don't need the team environment as much. Also, they tend to invite conflict. Excuse me. They might be seeking conflict. It might be part of what they want to get out of their relationships. For instance, a salesperson. We often see lower S scores in salespeople because sales is a very competitive environment, and you expect a higher degree of conflict there. So the S is a variable here that I look to when I'm looking at like team dynamics. If I see that there are a lot of high S people on a team, I know that there's probably going to be the opportunity for this team to work together very harmoniously. If, on the other hand, there's lots of low S scores on the team, I know that there's probably going to be opportunities for conflict there. There's going to be people who will, step up and really, shake things up, stir things up when they feel the need. And then the last dimension here is the C dimension, which stands for cautious. It's your preference for established protocols and standards. So they're procedural. High Cs tend to like a lot of structure and procedure in their lives. They tend to be perfectionists, and they do things very systematic. They're careful, they're very quality focused and precise. Lower C scores tend to be more rebellious and careless and challenging, more dynamic, lot less need for procedures. In fact, procedures might stifle them. You might find them to be more like rule breakers. So it's sort of the difference between the accountant as a high C and the mountain climber as a low C. So when we look at these four together, these are four very common behaviors that we see in the work environment. And the differences in behaviors, differences in personalities can create opportunities for plenty of interpersonal conflict. Just the fact that you have a different personality than someone can be the catalyst for conflict, and you might consider others difficult to work with, or others might consider you difficult to work with based on these personality differences. So, referring to that cheat sheet, this cheat sheet and the different things that are in here, what can you tell me about these people that might be catalysts for potential conflict situations here? Where are their primary differences? This is one of those situations where I'm prompting you to speak up. Dan, I cannot hear you. You're not muted, but I cannot hear you. Can anyone hear Dan? Okay, everyone's saying no, they can't hear you. So for those of you who don't want to speak up, you can put your thing in the chat here. So Dan has put in the chat D's and C's. So okay. what he's pointing to now is the fact that these people have very different D's and C's, and that's correct. So what about their D's and C's are potentials for conflict here.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I had to do a interrupt there, is what we would call that. But anyway, since no one else is speaking right now, I'm going to be the gregarious one, and I'm going to say that the low D is not very decisive, and they are going to probably pass on a lot of decisions, whereas the high D is going to try to make all the decisions. They're going to be very quick with it, especially since they have a low C, which means they're not very cautious. So they're going to be very reckless, whereas the other person is wanting to take their time since they're a high C.
Mm-hmm. So
not to be
that's
confused with a drink.
Yeah. So essentially what he's saying is that the person on the right there with the high D and the low C is going to tend to want to make decisions very fast, and they're going to be more, he used the word reckless. The thing about lower C's is big change is never a problem, or very seldom a problem for low C's. So when the combination of the high D and the low C, their decisions might be very disruptive, and they might want to make change, implement change that disrupts the organization. The person on the left with the lower D is going to take a lot more time to make a decision. So they might want time to analyze the situation before making the decision, and the higher D isn't going to want to give them that time. Plus, because they are more procedural, the high D is going to resist the bigger change. What we see with high C's is that they are more comfortable with incremental change than with big transformational change. Okay. So there's an opportunity there for conflict situations just in their daily interaction. Also, the person on the left has a higher S score, and the person on the right has a lower S score. So the person on the left is a lot less open to conflict. They would like for people to get along. The person on the right is a lot more acceptable of conflict. So when they make a fast decision that is disruptive, they know that this is going to create conflict, and they are probably okay with it. So on their interactions, this can be a very volatile relationship here. These people are almost opposite in their behaviors, and there are a lot of potential for interpersonal conflict here. It looks like Laura's got to leave. Sorry to see you leave, Laura. Like I said, this will be recorded and you'll be able to see it. You'll be able to see it on YouTube. I'll send out a link after I've uploaded it. So here are some insights that I'd like you to get from the DISC report here. First of all, there are some people who are very comfortable with a high level of conflict, while others are conflict averse. Okay. And that dynamic in of itself makes it a lot more difficult to manage conflict situations. Behavioral differences can trigger conflict. Just approaching things differently and behaving differently can be the catalyst for conflict in of itself. But understanding how you behave differently can mitigate problems before they happen. So let's go back to our two people here. Let's take a look at them, and let's say that they've both taken the DISC and that they have looked at one another's reports. So what opportunities do we now have for these two people to manage their differences in a way that can reduce conflict? Let me rephrase that a little bit here. I can help you succeed as a professional by giving you what you need to succeed. So the person on the left, what do they need? What do they need because of their behaviors? What do they really need in order to be successful?
I'm gonna jump in here since everyone else has remained muted, which is fine. Maybe I'm the high I in this group, which is fine with me. But the person on the left has a lower I than the person on the right. So the person on the left I see as an introverted individual that likes to take their time with everything. They think about things and then they produce their results. The person on the right is a faster with that. They're more gregarious, a little more outspoken. So in that kind of, if these two were working together, I would try to assign them different tasks in that, okay, got person on the right, you're the more vocal one. So you can be the one that's engaged on the sales floor, for instance. Whereas the person on the left, I want you in the back to be looking at the spreadsheets, doing blah, 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 whatever. And if they can do their tasks and combine their efforts, then that would work well together in that way.
How about where they're interacting with one another?
So is this still to me or is this to everybody now?
To you, to everybody. Clayton looks like he wants to talk.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm a little more introverted, I think, but yeah, I mean, as long as if they have this report and know that they're opposites, I think, and can tread lightly with their differences, I think they could probably make it work. But naturally, they're probably going to butt heads a little bit, I would say. So yeah, just knowing that, I think, honestly, everyone should have to take this test before they even enter a job together, just so because you might not be aware of these differences and why the conflict. And I think maybe, it would be beneficial to everyone, even a husband and a wife, to take this together. Yeah, so I think just knowing who you're working with and what their reactions would be and their typical reaction to certain situations is good.
Yeah, I think that you raise a good point there. Knowing this, especially if you're supervising, if you knew all of this about your staff, it would make your interactions a lot more effective. I don't know if you've read through the report, but there's a lot of really good information in there about how your behaviors now suggest an ideal work environment, an ideal job climate. So for this person, the ideal job climate for the person on the left is probably very different from the ideal job climate for the person on the right. Also, there's a page in there on communication advice for others. So person on the left wants to communicate with the person on the right, and they had their report, they would have a page there that they could refer to say, if I'm going to communicate with this right person here, here's what they expect out of me. So I can actually come up with strategies to manage my relationships with others if I know this information. Being aware of the differences is sort of step one. Using that information to manage your relationships is step two. So I'll give you an opportunity now to reflect on this. If I, as a high D, know that the person I'm interacting with as a low D needs time to assess things, I am not going to demand a decision from them now. I'm going to let them take a reasonable amount of time to collect data, to talk to other people, to do their process before I get a recommendation from them, even though I might be driven to have that decision, that recommendation right now. So I am now managing myself and managing my relationship with them. Also, vice versa, this person on the left might want to have this time, but they know that the person on the right is going to be driven. So this might help them now to sort of trust their own instincts, trust their own gut, to be able to make faster recommendations from time to time in order to give this person what they need. So it's sort of a way of looking at how you develop your team, how you develop your team relationships. And the more awareness that you create, the more opportunities you have for this type of development. So like Clayton says, everyone should have this assessment. Boy, do I wish everybody would come to me for this, because this to me gives you really deep insight into the workforce, especially if you look at the second part, which is related to what motivates people, the values index. You can get some really good insight when you combine the two. So do you see now, are there any questions about this? Do you see now that how, you know, opportunities can come up now for managing relationships from just by knowing what your differences are? Can anybody else see some opportunities now? I looked at the D. Can anybody see some opportunities around the C that we might, you know, that we might have to manage their relationship better around the things that C's expect? Let me give you my insight on this. So the high C wants structure, the low C wants dynamic. So if the low C makes a recommendation for a big transformational change, well, a big transformational change often breaks structure. Somebody has got to now come in and create new plans and procedures to address the big change. So here we go. This person here will often create that structure where none exists. So I would work with this person directly and I would say, hey, I need your help. We're going to have to come up with new plans and procedures to implement this change. And I need to rely on you to sort of lead that effort. So they can you know, order can come out of chaos. The chaos that the lower C creates, order can come out of it by people managing the relationships in this way. So are there any questions about this type of relationship management? This is pretty, this is more advanced stuff, I know. Boy, you folks are really not that talkative. I'm going to have to start prompting you by name here. Okay, thank you. Yes, this is insightful stuff. This really gets to sort of the core. Okay, the gray bar. Question on the gray bar from Joyce. The gray bar in the report is, it's best described this way. Well, first of all, the colored bars, the red, yellow, green, and blue, are your natural behavioral preferences. This is how you are. This is how you prefer to be most of the time. The gray shows how you can flex those behaviors in a specific set of circumstances. So if you feel like you're being observed, if there's a crisis situation, in other words, your behaviors can flex based on the situation, but after they flex, they tend to come back to the natural preference. So this person here on the right, or I'm sorry, on the left with the high C, in a crisis situation, they can flex down to a much lower C. They can accept a more dynamic situation with less structure for a short period of time, but then they want to flex, you know, after they're flexing, they want to go back to their normal preference, which is the high. Does that answer your question, Joyce? All right. So now we're going to have a discussion. So I expect you to unmute and participate here. We're going to talk about the difference between constructive and destructive conflict. So first of all, how do you differentiate between the two? What's the difference between constructive conflict and destructive conflict?
I think constructive conflict adds value where destructive value negates. Constructive conflict meaning it's just something that's natural. Again, understanding you're two different types of people that process differently, but constructive can be hostile environment, being very negative, aggressive. So it's definitely two different contrasts.
Okay.
Yeah, and constructive allows for better input from the team members if you're working in a team environment. Whereas if you come across as not constructive or destructive, people are going to be very reticent. They're going to be very, they're not going to be open to making suggestions that might be very helpful to you.
Yeah, there's, Alan brings up an interesting point, because in a team, there is a degree of conflict that is actually necessary. If the team leader wants to make a good decision, the team leader needs to hear input. And sometimes that input is, it's not in unison. People have different opinions. They have different recommendations and different insights. So that in of itself can create conflict. If you're discussing this, the leader's gonna hear different points of view. But that is necessary conflict that has to happen. A lot of times, the not hearing those differing points of view leads to worse decisions, because the leader needs to be able to hear, all these perspectives. And if they don't hear those perspectives, they might not make as good a decision as they could. So yeah, there is a big difference. So some degree of conflict is actually necessary and desirable. So what are the elements that are essential in order to have constructive conflict? How can you have constructive conflict? What do you need in order so that the conflict doesn't turn destructive?
I think I would say boundaries. So
Okay.
there's freedom to express concerns, voice opinions and stuff but I think there needs to be boundaries so people don't get angry, state that people are open to their opinions, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Okay,
there should be, there should be respect for everyone's opinion, regardless of what your personal feeling might be about it. Those boundaries, as was pointed out just a second ago, could include the fact that, we're going to listen to everyone. You may not agree with the person next to you or across the room, but we're going to listen, and we're going to be professionals about it, and we're going to be courteous about it.
I agree with that. Positivity in terms of your manner is very important to benefit all parties. Whereas to me, destructive is just that disagreement, that negativity that permeates the discussions or the interactions.
In doing what I do on a daily basis, the people that I deal with are usually not happy to see me when I show up. So I always go into it with a constructive attitude as to how to settle the situation, because when I show up, usually I get a destructive attitude from whom I'm dealing with. And I've found that going into it with a constructive attitude, 9 times out of 10 really helps me. And it usually de-escalates the person that I'm dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
I would also have to go back just to the knowledge of these characteristics within themselves, not taking it personal, knowing someone's a high D, they might come at you. It's not so much anger, but passion maybe. And just having that knowledge that we are different He is a high D. Helps go a long way. It's not personal all the time.
Sometimes when I'm doing these descriptions, I inadvertently create the impression that certain behaviors are more desirable to have than others. And there are definitely situations where having a certain set of behaviors is an advantage. This personality assessment, for instance, can be used to develop career benchmarks. For a salesperson, I'm looking for one set of behaviors. For a customer service person, I'm looking at a different set of behaviors. But in general, the behavioral aspects of an individual create a set of strengths. They also can create a set of blind spots. So it's not bad to have high D. It's not bad to have low D. It simply is. And you have certain strengths that you bring into a situation because of your personality. So it becomes, this is why I emphasize the idea of managing relationships based on the insight that you have about one another. Insight and awareness. And then the last thing, how important is trust in order to have constructive conflict? How important to you is having a certain level of trust with the people that you work with?
I personally think it's very, very important when you're a team leader and you hear varying opinions about a situation or a problem that you're trying to solve. It's very important to know that if you register an opinion which you think might be controversial, that team leader is not going to share that with the general public. So there's a great deal of trust involved on everyone's behalf, but in particular, the team leader.
What we find, excuse me, what we find in a team environment is that high functioning teams, high performing teams have a very high level of mutual trust. That having that level of trust makes having constructive conflict a lot easier. Because if you trust one another, you don't take that conflict personally. If you trust one another, you can come to the table and disagree, sometimes violently disagree, and then leave the table with a healthy relationship. Building trust is sort of like the foundation of having a high performing team. So if you're, I don't know if you've ever been in a team building workshop. A lot of the team building work that you do up front is to establish that level of trust. When you're working with clients though, what level of trust do you have with one another, do you believe? Does that ever become an issue in your work as you work with clients? Anyone? Anyone have an insight here?
Well, if a client doesn't trust you, they're not going to listen to you when you offer them advice. And if you don't trust a client, then you're probably going to be looking deeper into what they say or what they do to see if there's an ulterior motive. They might say, oh yeah, I got this in on time or whatever. And you'll be like, no.
So can a lack of trust then actually lead to conflict situations?
Yes.
Yes, very definitely so.
Most definitely.
So let's take a look then at do I really need to have a conflict here? And as I've been alluding to, the needs of both parties play an important role in the success of the relationship. Each side deserves respect and consideration. So if you trust one another, if you respect one another, if you have a consideration for one another, and if you understand one another at a deep level, if you understand their behaviors, if you understand what motivates them, it's a lot easier to have these types of conflicts. And when you acknowledge the legitimacy of conflict and you're willing to examine issues in a cooperative environment, this can open the door to creative problem solving, more cohesive teams, and improved relationships, as I've been stating. Learning to solve problems together as a team is sort of a next level skill. And it comes from being able to have these constructive conflict situations and manage your relationships. So conflict is more than just a disagreement. There's also an implied threat, with that conflict. And conflict can become more serious when it's ignored. As I mentioned earlier, there are people, because of their personality, because of that S score, who might not want to engage in conflict as much. But in learning to manage that, and in learning to see the benefits of conflict, you can see that it can be an opportunity for growth. And an opportunity through resolving issues to actually strengthen relationships and being better managers of our relationships with one another. So, as I've said, conflict avoidance is something that you might be driven to based on your personality. And some people manage conflict by simply avoiding it, but it's not the best response in all situations. So why might that be?
I think if you avoid it, you can just escalate the problems altogether. I mean, probably the simple answer.
How many of you have experienced this? You have conflict with an individual, the conflict goes unresolved. Then the next time you have conflict with this individual, you end up reliving the first conflict as you're experiencing the second conflict.
For me, that happens almost always.
So unresolved conflict is something that builds upon itself, and it tends to sour your relationship. What other experiences do you have? How many of you have can relay an experience where avoiding conflict created a problem in the future?
I think as a new employee, which I am, to the Department of Social Services, when you come in with an open mind and you're just ready to be a part of a team. But when you do have that conflict and it's unresolved and it's built upon, it chips away at the trust. Because when you come into a new environment, you come in open, ready to be a team player, to add value. And when you have those conflicts and they're unresolved, it sort of chips away at the openness and the readiness to build that trust that you bring to the table initially. That's my opinion.
And I think too, that if you don't confront the issue of conflict, other folks are going to think that you're easy, and you may lose credibility and you may lose trust. And that can be very, very, well, that could be bad.
Definitely. So this is a little self-assessment. And it's in your workbook. I would like you to take about 5 minutes to complete this. And essentially, what you want to do is you want to answer each one of these questions with a yes or no. And then tally up your yeses. So let's take about 5 minutes to go through this and tally up your yeses here. Instead of getting into an argument, I put off certain discussions. So determine if that's a yes or a no for you. When someone doesn't deliver on a promise, I judge them more quickly than I should. Sometimes I bring up difficult subjects in a way that makes people defensive. Let's be honest, there are people I deal with who simply cannot be motivated. When someone is struggling, I tend to offer advice, even though they may just want to have someone listen to their ideas. When discussing problems, I sometimes get sidetracked and miss the actual problem. There are some people I simply cannot work with. Sometimes it's not them being difficult, it's me. I prefer to just jump in and have the conversation rather than spending a lot of time planning for it. I know that I have to have these conversations, but I do not like to have them. And so for each one of those, answer yes or no, and then tally up the responses, tally up your yeses. Is this difficult for anyone? Anyone having trouble deciding some of these? Joyce says, I think this is very situational. I am different at work than I am in my personal life. I've heard that sentiment expressed often, that there's a work person and there's a person at home.
Yeah, and I think for me, because I deal with, my primary focus of my job is dealing with people that are behind on their mortgages and at risk of foreclosure. And so my job is to bring to people's attention things they don't necessarily always want to hear. I have to be brutally honest with people. I try to be soft, but I can't sugarcoat it. But personally, at home, I tend to avoid stuff. So, because with personal relationships, the person's more important to me. And so I tend to be more avoidant in my personal life.
I couldn't agree more with that. I'm the same way. I deal with confrontational people all day long, and the last thing I want to do is deal with any kind of conflict when I get home.
I feel like I'm kind of the opposite.
So, out of your self-assessment here, I'm curious, did anybody have 0 yeses? So that I can let you teach the course. Actually, I teach the course and I have a yes in there. My yes is about people who I can't work with. And this is something that has come up over the years. I've actually fired my boss because I can't work with him. I have left positions because, and I can tell you exactly where the relationship failed. I can tell you, I don't have to give him a personality assessment in order to know what his attributes are. And I can tell you exactly what it is about this person that was a mismatch with our relationship. And because my boss was unwilling to manage our relationship and give me what I need to be successful, I needed to move on. How about 1 to 3? Did anybody just have 1 to 3 yeses? Yay, Dan. How about 4 to 6?
I'm in there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Split down the middle, 5 and 5.
Did anybody
Five.
did any one of them really jump out at you as this is something that happens a lot? Or
Yeah, there are some people I simply cannot work with. Also, let's be honest, there are people I deal with who simply cannot be motivated.
so are there any questions about anything that we've covered in this section? Because we're done with section 2 now, and it's time to move on to section 3. Incidentally, after section 3, I'm going to ask you if you want to take a break. And section 3 won't take as long as section 2. I knew that was going to take a long time. We've been in it for an hour. I knew that we were going to have a lot of discussions around some of those points. So earlier I said each one of those previous workshops that we've done sort of feed into this one. This is one of the areas. We talked a little bit about difficult conversations in our conflict management workshop. And if we understand that there are benefits to having conversations with difficult people, can we also realize some benefit from walking away? Does every difficult situation need to be addressed, or are some things really not worth addressing? So in deciding whether or not you want to proceed with a difficult conversation, you should consider some things. One of the variables is how important is the relationship to you? But not every conversation is necessary. And here's a way to determine whether or not conflict is necessary. Ask yourself the following questions. First of all, is this person important to me? Is this relationship important to me? Has this happened before? Does this bother me or other people? And can I or should I invest my time? If the answer is no to any of these 5 questions, we can recommend that you remove yourself from the situation. So if you get a yes for all of these, sometimes probably when it comes to like your client relationships, you're probably going to come up with a lot of yeses just because the nature of the situation. So you're not going to be able to remove yourself. But there are situations where you can determine whether or not conflict is appropriate. So think of a scenario where you've encountered conflict with a difficult person. Okay, I'm sure everybody can come up with one. Maybe something that just happened yesterday, where you've encountered conflict with a difficult person. So think about these things. How do they approach you? How do you approach them? What kind of expectations do they have in interactions with you? And what can you do to improve that relationship? So give me an example of, you don't have to name names or anything. Give me an example where you've had conflict with somebody who you consider to be difficult to get along with. Describe the nature of your interaction and your relationship, and what can you do to improve it? hopefully what we did in that first session can give you some insights on what you can do to improve relationships. Who wants to step up? Joyce says, I respectfully avoid a coworker. Well, I think I'd like to hear about this one, Joyce. I think the group would like to hear about this one. Joyce, okay, I understand. Who has a situation that they're willing to talk about?
I have a bunch of them, so I mean, I can talk. The most recent one, we had to close the pool due to some maintenance issues, and I have one of our regular patrons who just blasted me about it like I had any control over the situation. I mean, in hindsight, looking back, just thinking about some of the things, I think his real problem on my end was maybe the communication. I sent out an email. I guess he doesn't check email, and there's just so many people that are signed up. It's a free swim program, so I can't sit here and call every individual person on a last minute. When I found out maybe 2 hours before the class was going to start for that day. It's a 12 to 2 free swim. I found out I think like 10:30 that we had to close the pool down, and I sent out a blast email, and he didn't get it. He showed up. I didn't have anyone down by the pool. I had called the lifeguard. You don't have to show up. The pool's down. Again, my office isn't down there, so I wasn't standing by the pool, letting people know what was going on. And he was pushing on the door, trying to get in his bathing suit, and just, the lifeguard's not here. He didn't show up, and just started blasting me about it. And I tried to explain to him that I emailed everyone, and he just didn't care. So, maybe, I don't know, could have reached out to him personally with a phone call and emailed everyone else. I guess might have helped diffuse the situation. Went down there and stood there for, at the start to make sure no one showed up. I think it was a communication thing. Maybe he's just angry. I don't know.
How well do you know this person?
I mean, I just know him because I lifeguard occasionally myself, and he comes in, and I don't think he associates me with being the supervisor of that program. I think he associates me as one of the lifeguards, and when I think he was yelling at me over the phone, he didn't know he was yelling at me, because he's very nice to me in person when he sees me. And I don't think he realized that I was the same person. He's an older gentleman. I don't know if he put 2 and 2 together, but just let me have it. And I tried to explain to him, like, look, I was told on last minute, it's not something I control. I don't oversee the chemicals and the balance of the pool, and that's why we had to close it down. It was for safety reasons. It just didn't care.
Is this something that occurs on a regular basis?
No, but I think he showed up one other time the prior week where the lifeguard was late, and he pushed on the door.
No, I mean the chemical part of it. Do you have scheduled?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
It hardly ever happens. So, again, I think maybe it was a little escalation of the week before getting there and not being able to get in on time, and then probably assuming that was the same thing. Lifeguard didn't show up, no communication, whatever. Maybe hit back-to-back weeks and he just got angry. I don't know, but I just basically sat there and let him blast me, and after he wasn't accepting my explanation, and just it's Mr. Bill, it's fine. He's let him vent on me, and he's a regular, so I don't want to upset him either. He signs up every session, so yeah.
Who else?
Well, in my previous position as a supervisor on a job site, I had a particular gentleman that I constantly had the same problem with on and off for 5 years. And I hate to say this, but basically, when you're the supervisor, the job's got to be done. You're on a time schedule. You have to meet inspection deadlines, and you're dealing with certain people that just, I think it was mentioned a little while earlier, that are more interested in looking at TikTok and Facebook than actually getting any work done. And this particular person, I mean, I worked with him pretty much for 5 years. And I mean, I got to respect him as a person and as a friend, but as a coworker, he is the first person that came to mind on the. Or there are some people I simply cannot work with, because at the end of the day, when the job isn't done and I don't meet the deadlines, it's not his head on a chopping block; it's mine. And I've tried numerous scenarios. I mean, it's incentives that cost me money out of my own pocket in buying guys breakfast, buying them lunch. Sometimes it'll work for a day or two, but within a week or two, it always goes back to what it was before. You give them direction in the morning. You tell them, hey, this is what I expect. This is what I need by the end of today. And then you go away for an hour and you come back, and then you go find them off in the corner looking at TikTok. And
Wow.
after 5 years, it was time for me to move on, since apparently, because of course, my speaking to management was simply, well, there is nobody else available. So if that was the best answer I was getting, it was time for me to move on.
Yeah, I had a situation in my prior life as well where I worked for defense industry, and working or having to work with folks that knew a lot more technically than I did, it was very easy to become intimidated by them. And I had the mindset that I wouldn't let that happen to me. And then I would approach them and I would tell them politely that I knew that they knew more technically than I did, but that I needed their assistance in making this project a success. And by and large, most of the folks capitulated, and it worked out really, really well. You had some pushback, but when you told people that you recognized that they were more technically competent than you were, and that was the case in a lot of instances because of the nature of the business. I mean, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a chemist. If you just got to put the cards on the table and just tell them, I need your help, and most of the time they'll comply.
So it sounds like you figured out a way to manage your relationships.
I did, and it worked out really well.
Good. Anyone else?
I had in previous lives, I've worked as a security guard and a 911 dispatcher, and a lot of other very high stress situations where there are very, very difficult people. And I always just try to speak with a very calm voice and just be like, hey, I'm just here to help you. And that's that. And then when dealing with anybody, I find that I take that I'm here to help kind of approach to everyone and just try to be calm myself. And that usually will then bring people a step down from whatever is going on. And if I can't help them, then I'll find out how to help you. Or if I can't help you and I can't find out how to help you, I'm going to make sure that I find, there's a list of things that you say to someone that calms them down. And then sometimes they can't be calmed down, but you just got to keep going with them.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I do want to remind you, if you're in a situation where participating, verbally isn't an option, like if you're in your team environment in there and everything, and talking out loud isn't an option for you, you can put your responses in the chat, and that works just as well. So, any questions? Is it time for a break? Does anybody need to take 5 to do anything, go to the bathroom or anything like that? Anyone need a break? Okay, we're going to take 5. So I'm gonna stop sharing here. It's 10:47, so let's convene back here at 5 till 11. Okie dokie, let's go ahead and get started again. I'm going to move into the next section, which is on preventing problems. So what we're going to try to do in this section is to learn how to keep things from becoming a problem in the first place. So prevention ought to be your first goal. And there's a lot of things that we can do. I consider prevention the 20% of your actions that eliminate 80% of your problems. So an example of prevention is what we did in the first session. We learned about how the personality assessment can help us understand one another better. And in doing that, we can learn to manage our relationships in a way that eliminates a lot of the issues that might come up from not knowing these things. And the way I like to think about it is in the second bullet there. It's a matter of managing your energy. I learned about creative style from a clinical or an organizational psychologist. And when I got certified to administer his personality assessment back in 2009, I went up to Penn State, and he actually taught the course himself. And the way he talks about this particular topic, I think is very useful. It's a useful way of framing the situation. Essentially, you have so much energy you can put into managing your relationships. You have so much energy that you can put into dealing with problems. The less energy that you have to spend on managing your relationships, the more that you can spend on more important things. So if you can prevent conflict from happening, you can focus your energy on resolving the really important issues, solving problems, resolving a more important conflict. So some of the tools we've already talked about. So team awareness that comes from self-awareness. You learn about yourself, you learn about others, you compare your assessments, you learn how to manage your relationships better. Then also emotional intelligence. One of the main aspects of emotional intelligence is self-management. So learning how to manage yourself, and also learning better communication skills, because communication issues is a primary driver for conflict. Poor communications, lack of communications can really create situations that could be mitigated if you had better communication skills. So this table here, this graph, this chart here is interesting. And when I explain to you what this is, I like to show this in all of my workshops. When people, those of you who took the assessment prior to this morning, because I know a couple of you took it this morning, I wasn't able to get you on here. But those of you who took it up to yesterday, I was able to get you on here. And what this is a team report. And you see at the corners here are the different behavioral dimensions. So D is in the upper left hand, and then I is in the upper right hand, S is in the lower right hand, and C is in the lower left hand. And I call this the rubber band chart. And it's a way of depicting all four of your scores together in one point. And the reason I call it the rubber band chart is your score is like a rubber picture that each one of these dots is a point in the middle, and they're connected to the four corners with a rubber band, but the strength of that rubber band is determined by your score in that component. So if you've got a high S score, it pulls you down here. towards the lower right. If you've got a higher I score, it pulls you towards the upper right. And so each one of these four corners is pulling this dot, this circle here in a different direction. And it's determined, your location on here is determined by the combination of all four of your scores. So what this is telling us, if you're down here, if your scores are down here in this quadrant, you tend to have a higher S score and you tend to have a higher I score, but your S is sort of dominating. And if your location here is more towards the left, you've got a higher C score. The C score is pulling you in that direction. And the benefit in seeing everybody's scores together on a grid like this is it shows you how much you have in common. People with high I and S scores tend to be more people-oriented. People with high D and C scores tend to be more task-oriented. So what we see here is that this is a more people-oriented group. And if you all were on a team, you would all sort of see your scores clumped down here together. You're very people-oriented individuals. If you have a high D and I score, you tend to be more extroverted. If you have a high C and S score, you tend to be more introverted. So again, a lot of these scores are pulling you down into the more introverted. So because most of these are in this lower right quadrant, we have a people-oriented, more introverted group. But then there are others who sort of fall outside that cluster. We've got one up here that is more extroverted. And you can see that there's some distance here between this person's scores and then the rest. So when you see a distribution like this, you can see here are some opportunities for learning. There are opportunities to mitigate conflict, because the further dispersal you have in your group, the more opportunity you're going to have for conflict. If you might think, okay, these folks are all sort of clumped together here in the lower right, they can probably work together pretty effectively. And you would be right. They would have a whole lot in common and they might work together very effectively. But you also have situations here where people need to have strategies because they're not part of that little clump. If you consider maybe that this clump represents the status quo of the group, then there are going to be some outliers that might feel that they're not part of that status quo. And so we need to have some strategies to mitigate. I've done this with groups where these things are scattered all over the place. But in working with the WIOA partners, I do see a whole lot of folks whose scores are down here. They are more people-oriented and more introverted, and it might just be the nature of the work that attracts people with certain personality aspects in common. So what sort of insights do you see about this group as we look at this? What are some of the things that you can tell me about this group, just from looking at this distribution here? I never should have let you go on break. Now your minds are elsewhere. Okay, Dan says we take time with our decisions. Melissa says we're more introverted people with high S scores. So Joyce says, I don't think of myself as an introvert. So I guess it's in the way that you interpret what you're seeing. Remember that the intensity of the scores tends to pull you in a certain direction. So, for instance, people in this area here are being pulled by a higher I and a higher S. Okay. High I's tend to be more introverted. High S's tend to be, I'm sorry, extroverted. High S's tend to be more introverted. So there are things about behaviors that pull against one another. High I and high S is a very common combination, especially with people in your lines of work. The high, and it might seem to be, sort of contradictory. How can a high I who is more extroverted coexist with a high S that's more introverted? It's the dynamics of the behaviors together. That's why it's really important to read the report and see where you, when they bring the four behaviors together, to look at the strength-based insights and things of that nature. So what I like to offer people, because we don't have a lot of time to focus on their individual reports during the workshop, is to get with me, and then we can do a one-on-one. I'll go over your report with you, and we can take the time to understand what the report's telling you. So I wouldn't be too concerned. I wouldn't, if you don't feel that you're an introvert, for instance. It's the combination of the different behaviors together that is putting you in a quadrant here. So let's, Joyce, if you'd like to, I'd be happy to go over your report with you. So one of the things that Dan says, we take time with our decisions. That's correct. In your line of work, do you often have to make snap decisions?
Not really.
Yeah, it's nice if you're a low D. It is nice to have that luxury of being able to take your time and learn and be more prepared.
Say in my
Looking
position,
out of college.
I have to be more reserved on making snap judgments, because I have to make sure when I'm making decisions, I'm making the proper one, not only for myself, but for my employer as well that I represent. So that's why I always have to take my time when I make decisions, because I have to make sure I'm making the proper one.
It appears to me that it looks like we're all good listeners, and I think being a good listener in our occupations is extremely important.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I'm not really sure if I've ever encountered a personality combination that I would associate with like being better listeners. Certainly you have the opportunity. What I find often is that listening can be an acquired skill. With some people, listening doesn't come naturally. a good test for this is when you're confronted with a problem, do you tend to go to the solution really quickly, or do you tend to ask questions about the problem? So again, you're looking at like the high D response would be, hey, let's attack that problem. Let's get a solution fast. And because of that, they might not be as open to listening about the problem before rendering a solution. I encounter that quite frequently, that you state a problem and then immediately the person you talk to goes to the solution instead of talking about the problem. Let's talk about empathy. Empathy is one aspect of emotional intelligence that is really important when it comes to managing our relationships. And it's defined as the action of understanding and being aware and being sensitive to the feelings, thoughts, and experiences of others. It's not the same as sympathy. Sympathy is having feelings of pity and sorrow for someone else's misfortune. Empathy is different than that. I like to speak of empathy as being able to put yourself in another person's shoes. And if you have strong empathy, you can see things from their perspective a lot easier. So let's talk a little bit about some things that are related to empathy. Let's talk about the difference between the coworker relationship and a client relationship. Could you guys give me some insights here as to what's the difference between a coworker relationship and a client relationship?
A coworker relationship is something that is, in my opinion, it's ongoing. You work with your coworkers on a daily basis or a weekly basis. A client relationship can be more finite. You can develop a relationship with the client, develop a business agreement or a contract. And then when that's consummated, then you may not work with that client again in the future.
So it's more transactional?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
Mm-hmm. Does that resonate with the rest of you?
I agree, because most of the people that I deal with on a client level is basically detail oriented as to what we're doing and what needs to be accomplished. As to where my experiences with my coworkers are, of course we deal with work related issues, but we're also very laid back, and we have friendly discussion. We have talk about our family lives, which we normally would never do with our clients.
Mm-hmm. Tell me some of the ways that you build rapport with your clients.
Well, for myself, in my line of work, I deal with complaints.
Mm-hmm.
I basically, when I approach a client who turns into a client, if you will, I go in with a very positive attitude, and I go in with a very positive attitude, and I go in, I make sure I'm very approachable, because they're never happy to see me when I show up to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And that normally helps drive how things go from there. And sometimes when they're not very receptive in the beginning, and I explain to them again, very, very nicely in the beginning, that, look, we're going to, unfortunately, we're going to have to deal with each other right now. And this is going to go one of two ways. And this way is going to be so much easier as compared to the other way, which is, it's going to be much more difficult. And 8 times out of 10, that usually works for me.
How deep into your clients' personal lives and personal situations do you delve? when you're trying to establish rapport?
Well, as a housing counselor, I have to. That's part of, a lot of times people are coming to me with, they're facing a foreclosure, but it's kind of like layers of an onion, I'll often say to them, is their hardship might have started much further back, you know, through a divorce, cancer, whatever, and job loss. And so, given the situation, I will sometimes share, you know, hey, I've been through this myself, and they're to encourage them that you will get through this and we'll get through it together, type thing. But that's my everyday is dealing in their personal lives, which is a challenge because when I'm done working with the clients, so many of them continue to reach out to me because we have built a rapport. When I need to close off that relationship and move on, it's a challenge because they've learned now a door's been opened, it's hard to close necessarily.
Yeah. Do anybody else experience that?
I actually just, the woman I've been dealing with for the last couple months on an issue that we finally managed to get resolved just in the last couple of days. And yeah, I literally, when I spoke with her on the phone, had told her that we jokingly said how we were on each other's Christmas card list. And I even joked to her the other day that I'm going to miss our biweekly phone calls. And she flat out told me, by all means, reach out.
So is this a good thing? I mean, clearly you've established a very high level of rapport. If they want to continue the relationship beyond, you know, your normal client interaction. In building these relationships, how have you been able to show empathy for your clients and their situations? Joyce says that she gets referrals from good relationships. That's good. How has empathy figured into these situations? Okay, let me ask this a different way. Have you ever considered, you know, how empathy figures into the equation? Melissa said, empathy helps the client to trust you. That's a really good point, Melissa, because the empathy is one really good way of building rapport, and an essential element to building rapport is trust. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's from Joyce. Nakiba says, I often meet with clients at a very low point in their lives. Compassion and kindness goes a very long way. So empathy is one really powerful way of preventing problems from happening in the first place. There are communication skills that enable you to leverage your empathy to create really positive relationships and build rapport. So using phrases like I hear, I understand, I think you are saying this, are ways of connecting. We're going to learn something really powerful here, some really powerful communications techniques to leverage our empathy. Rephrasing is a communications technique. It's a way of showing, indirectly showing, that you understand what the person's concerns are. It's an opportunity to show the person that you understand the concern, and it also gives you a way of crafting an appropriate response. So I'm going to teach you a very powerful rephrasing technique. I've used this in several of my workshops. I do this all the time when I'm talking to an individual, because usually when I'm talking to somebody, it's about a problem related to work, a problem related to their professional development, or certain skills they're trying to build. This is a communication technique that enables you to create instant rapport and connection with an individual, because it shows them that you understand them. A lot of times, just taking the effort to helping an individual be understood is all it takes to break down that trust barrier and build rapport. So this is not in your manual. You might want to write this down. The first part of this is to listen. Be an active listener. So listen to what the person is telling you. Give them an opportunity to explain their situation, and give them an opportunity to be heard. And then at some point, when you feel like you've heard enough, you essentially repeat what they said to you. You say, so you're saying this. And you don't want to deviate from what they told you at this point. It's not time to deviate from what they told you. You're simply repeating back what they said. So this is the first step in building that rapport. You've listened to them and you haven't colored it or translated it or biased it or anything. You're just repeating back what they said to you. So then you ask them to tell you more. Ask them some questions, probe into it a little more to get some things clarified. Let them explain it more so that you can develop more insights. And then at some point, when you feel like that you understand the situation well enough, you rephrase what they've told you in a way that clarifies and adds insight. So are you really saying this? And you essentially now rinse and repeat. If they say no, you say, oh, okay, well, tell me more. And then you do this as much as you need to in order to get that yes. Because once you've got the yes, you've rephrased it in a way that really focuses in on the root cause. You give them more insight into their situation by going through this process. And it puts you both now on the same sheet of music. And this creates instant rapport. If you can help them solve a problem, it builds trust, it creates that rapport, and it really helps you mitigate potential problems. And I do this constantly. I learned this years ago, and I do this technique constantly when I'm talking to people. Has anyone else used this technique before? Akiva says, yes, she's used this. Joyce has used this. Dan says, validating their feelings and situation are important. One of the biggest mistakes, and I see this a lot, one of the ways you can really short circuit this is to try to direct them in a way that makes you more comfortable with what they're talking about. So if how do I explain this? If you've ever heard the saying, if the only tool that you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. A really effective way to short circuit this process is to look for the nail, is to try to get them to rephrase it in a way that you're comfortable with dealing with, rather than searching for the truth. You know, this enables you to really connect with them. So here are some misconceptions to keep in mind when you're going through this process and just generally communicating. First misconception is people always pay attention when you're speaking with them. This is not the case. When people say they are paying attention, they are really paying attention. Again, not always the case. When someone says, I know, they really do. Saying something over and over again will ensure that your listener understands. Nothing can be further from the truth. And saying something over and over slowly or loudly will be even more effective. These are misconceptions we have in our communications. I want to talk a little bit about active listening. Listening and hearing aren't the same thing. Listening is a skill, and you must learn it and practice it in order to use it successfully. Active listening means that we try to understand things from the speaker's point of view. So again, we are using our empathy. We're leveraging our empathy to make us a better listener. You're trying to put yourself in their shoes. And it includes letting the speaker know that we are listening and that we understood what's said. So this rephrasing technique that I just taught you is a really powerful way of showing that you understand. And it involves active listening. Active listening is the first part of that technique. So hearing, which is a physical process, where sound enters the eardrum and messages are passed to the brain, is different than active listening. Active listening can be described as an attitude that leads to listening for shared understanding. When I'm listening to an individual and listening to their problem, I am trying to gather insights. I'm trying to understand them. I'm trying to understand their situation and understand the problem through my interaction with them. So I'm trying to achieve a shared understanding. I'm trying to get us to the same point, to make sure that we're on the same sheet of music and both standing in the same location. So when we make a decision to listen for total meaning, we listen for the content of what's being said, as well as the attitude behind what's being said. And this is what makes interactions in, post-COVID interactions so difficult to achieve the active listening. So, because as we know, what you say is only part of how you communicate. A lot of, how you say it. Is the speaker happy, angry, excited, sad, or something else entirely? You can't, sometimes if you're not together, you can't see their body language. A lot of you have your video turned off, so I can't see you. So it hampers our communication. I don't see what you're doing. I don't see your body language. I can't tell if you're happy, angry, or excited or anything. Oh, and Melissa points out masks make that even more difficult. Whew, boy, isn't that the truth? It's extremely hard to communicate when you're wearing masks. Extremely difficult. So really what I've been getting at here is that perfect communication results when all parties are self-aware, they understand themselves, they're team aware, they understand others, they're active listeners, they're skilled at asking the right questions, and they take time to ensure everyone is understood. Is there any surprise then that most communications can't be categorized as perfect? How often do you have this ideal situation? Has anyone ever experienced this ideal situation in their interactions with others? How often do we have to settle for just one in our communications? Only with your BFF. So it should come as no surprise that communication is far from perfect most of the time, and that it is a primary driver of creating the problems that we're trying to prevent. So what are your insights from this? What can you do to try to get better at achieving perfect communication? What can we do? What are some of the things that we've talked about today that can help you with that?
Definitely get to know your team better, or your customer better, I'd say. I think most of us have a pretty good awareness of ourselves, I think. Maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, self-awareness is tough. And a lot of times taking something objective like the psychometric instruments are the most direct and easiest way to achieve that self-awareness. I mean, you know, you take the Disc Plus, you read it, and then you get insights about yourself that you haven't thought about. There are people who take this, and when I talk to them, they say, I never thought of this as being a strength. I never thought that this aspect of my personality would be a strength. I never thought that this aspect of this other person's personality is a strength, that they bring something to the team that I don't. So achieving high self-awareness, achieving high team awareness, learning active listening skills, learning how to ask questions, and then taking the time to ensure everyone is understood. If you become adept at these things, you too can achieve perfect communication. So what are some additional methods of preventing problems that you've found successful in your line of work and the things that you do every day?
I call it over communicating.
Over communicating?
I think it helps, you know, with some aspects of my job. Again, back to mainly the younger generation, to make sure that they are aware that their shift is coming up in an hour. Like I shouldn't have to send these messages, but I just feel like it's, oh yeah, and a reminder. Like again, I don't feel like you should have to do that, but it seems to work. I hate it. But, yeah.
Well, you're right. Over communicating, or what you call over communicating. I'm the same way. I send out a lot of communications. So one of my blind spots tends to be sending out communications in a way that is more convenient for me. And so if email is the most convenient, a form of communication, I tend to lean on it and not on things like calling and direct interaction. But, discovering that each person has a preferred way of being communicated with and trying to meet their needs can become a real issue. Like you said, this person who was hostile to you about the pool probably didn't read their email. Yet email is definitely the most efficient form of communication that we have. What else? Joyce uses an action plan. Action plans are great. I'm going to encourage you to use your action plan for this training. Practice empathy. Here are some that come up frequently. First, Alan says, make yourself accessible. That's good. First, learn to look for nonverbal cues. Look at the way they communicate nonverbally. Again, this can be very difficult if you're not face-to-face. But look for nonverbal cues. So learn to read between the lines. Go beyond what they're saying and try to probe into what are they not saying. And then learn how to ask open-ended questions. This is something that I can help you with. We developed a cheat sheet for open-ended probing questions that get to like different levels of inquiry. And one of the things that I'll do is send you this cheat sheet after we're done today as a tool that you can use to come up with some open-ended questions that you can be using with all of your clients and all of the people you interact with that really help to sort of dig down and probe into the situation. And we've already talked about paraphrasing and rephrasing as tools, effective tools. Are there any questions about this? Because we are now headed into sort of the home stretch of the day. It's we got about 20 minutes or so left, so I want to sort of push through this. And this is sections about managing anger. Some of you pointed out when you registered that managing anger is something that you really wanted to get out of this because it's a natural emotion. It can't be avoided, but learning how to deal with it constructively and appropriately is really important. Right now, as you know, too many people are angry. We are angry about all sorts of things in the world. We're angry about our situation in our country. We are angry about our politicians. We're angry about the economy. We're angry about the job market. We're angry about things every day. And as a result, things like workplace violence occur. More common examples are everywhere, though. It interferes with teamwork and productivity. And it can also can contribute to creating a hostile and frightening work environment. So as a result, companies face legal pressures to prevent this type of work environment. So this is why having coping strategies with anger has become very important. But also if you look at things from the employee's point of view, when you're angry, it really takes the fun out of work. But there's really not a whole lot you can do about masking it. I mean, it's a natural emotion. It's unrealistic for people not to feel angry. Instead, the goal is to help and sometimes require that people deal with their anger appropriately. Problems do not come from anger, though. Problems come from the negative ways people express anger. One of the real insights, powerful insights you can get from your personality assessment is, what about this can lead me to a better understanding of what triggers me or what evokes an angry response from me. I know one of the keys in learning how to manage my anger was to understand that I expect people, when they make a decision, to stick with their decision. When I take the time, I'm a low D, so I take the time in order to fully vet problems. I talk to people. I don't recommend a solution until everybody's weighed in. I give everyone the opportunity to achieve a consensus and get behind the thing. And then I say, okay, this is what we need to do. Let's move forward. And we get a decision and we move forward. And then 3 months later, I find out that the one person who wasn't engaged did an end around to try to short circuit the direction that we're taking. And that really makes me angry. And I've learned that about myself. And so one of my coping strategies is to figure out, okay, I can't assume that just because I've done what it takes to achieve consensus that I actually have. So I need to actually do one-on-ones with people and make sure that they feel that we're headed in the right direction and that they can get behind this. The more I do that, the less opportunity I give for people to come and short circuit it because they never agreed with it in the first place. So I've had to develop coping strategies for me because I know these are the things that will really set me off. And it's like, I see a train wreck on the horizon. If I don't deal with this, there's going to be more train wrecks. So I need to get in front of these train wrecks. So how do you manage your own anger? Give me some ways that you use to manage your anger right now. What are some tools and techniques that you use? Breath control. Go for a walk. That's I do that a lot. I have to go for a walk. I have to get out of this. Count to 10, walking. Meditation and breathing. Music. One of the things that I assume coming into these is that there are that people have coping mechanisms that they rely on already, even prior to coming into this training. Initiate the dive reflex for high stress situations. Dan, you want to explain that a little more clearly?
Is my mic working? Check,
Yeah.
check. Okay. The dive reflex is something when you, so like if you, when you're swimming underwater and you're holding your breath, you have to control your breath. And then when you're underwater, it will focus your mind to exactly what is going on presently that you can control, which is your breath in this instance, or the situation at large. And so one ways you can initiate the dive reflex is to go into the bathroom, fill the sink up with water, put your head in there, hold your breath, and everything just comes right to center. And it initiates the, what's the word I'm looking for? The more primitive parts of your brain, to where you're not actually feeling those emotions anymore. You're just focused on objectives.
Has anyone ever heard of this before? This is totally new to me. That's really interesting.
I look at everyone's comments and none of that works for me. And really the only thing that I found that is helpful is to be able to have someone to unload on that has nothing to do with it, which sounds terrible and crazy probably, but even if it's my mom or dad, you know, if it's a situation that I can just unload, like I want to unload on the person that I'm angry at, on someone who can just listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's hard to find in the workplace.
Yeah.
If you're being fair, you know. I'll have to try and stick my head in the water next time, see if that works.
I'm going to try that. That's really interesting.
Cold water.
Since I work at a pool, it might work.
Cold water works better. Yeah.
Okay. Comment here. I have some great sounding boards at work. Do any of the rest of you have sounding boards at work you can rely on? Getting a few yeses here. So here are some techniques that you might have encountered. You might use these. If not, you might want to learn how to use them. Express your feelings appropriately and learn how to express your feelings appropriately and skillfully. Release your physical tension. Analyze what's going on. Think about what is going on here that is making you angry. Address your fears. Put yourself in charge of you and your emotions. Use your emotions effectively and approach the situation logically. And that last one is hard to do sometimes. But really, I think what this boils down to is to understand your anger better. Understand what it is about the situation that is making you angry. And then learn what are the situations that I get angry at the most often, repetitively. These things that come up over and over and over again. And some things to remember. Don't accuse others of making you angry. Your anger is a response. Don't preach at others when you're angry, and don't bring up past grievances when you're trying to fight fair. And this, I got that highlighted because it loops back to something we talked about up front. And that is, resolving conflict. If you have past grievances and past conflicts that have not been resolved, the temptation is to now, during an anger situation, be angry about all of those things and then bring up a laundry list. It's like you explode. So in dealing with those issues when they come up, you can really sort of short circuit this, diffuse the impact of past grievances. Learn how to be more effective by focusing on the issue at hand. So here are some things that you can use to deal with other people's anger. First of all, use positive self-talk. I've heard that sentiment expressed here, going into a situation positively. Check your own body language. Acknowledge the other person's feelings. Again, we're showing empathy there. But then also be able to share your own feelings and fears. Show that you are listening. Create that connection, create that communication connection that we've been talking about. Think of ways to make a conciliatory gesture. When you express your own needs and wants, do so calmly and persistently. And keep in mind that when you are dealing with somebody, their self-esteem might be an issue. When I used to work more directly with people who are having career issues and saying, I want to get out of what I'm doing and start a new career. One of the things that I learned was that their self-esteem was almost invariably negatively impacted by their career situation, be it that they are in the wrong career or in the wrong job climate, or that the relationship they have with their boss is negative, and that this over time has really negatively impacted their self-esteem. And that is something that you cannot directly see in an individual. That's something that often only comes out after you get to know them and build rapport with them and sort of delve into that. I do have a personality assessment that uncovers things like this, but I don't use it that often, especially in a situation like this. If I was coaching somebody one-on-one, I might use that. Because when you explore issues like self-esteem, it can really dredge up some stuff. And you need to be prepared to be able to deal with that. So here are some guidelines for assertive anger. First, start positively. All right. Be direct. Use an active voice. Say, I feel this. Specify the degree of your anger. Are you really angry? Are you annoyed? Are you furious? Don't accuse the other of making you angry. I am angry because of this. Share your feelings of threat and fear. Acknowledge your own responsibility. And avoid self-put-downs or invitations to criticism or retaliatory anger. Okay? One of the things that bringing up communication methods again, one of the things that I found that not all, when you're dealing with issues involving anger and conflict, email is the absolute worst medium for trying to express it. I used to have a boss who would get in a situation and then just fire out, blow up on an email, and fire out, and then boom, drop this bomb in your inbox. And then you go in to talk to him about it, and he's perfectly fine. Email was his way of expressing his anger in a way that diffused his own emotions. But he did so in a way that helped him out, but it hurt everyone else, because an email is forever. And it prevents you from having the interaction. So in these assertive anger techniques, consider that it becomes really, really effective when you're doing this face-to-face, and really, really, really ineffective when you're trying to do this through something impersonal like email. So here are some self-protective techniques to block criticism. So we don't want to invite, retaliation and criticism when we express our anger, but we probably will. There will be situations where you do. So essentially, there are ways that you can diffuse this. First of all, you could use the broken record technique. You can repeat the same statement over and over in a calm voice, keeping it on point. You can fog it. You can agree that there might be some truth in what the other person is saying in a way that sort of diffuses it, but you're not relenting. You're not giving up your ground. And then also negative assertion. You can calmly agree with the critic. Alan has to leave. Okay, Alan, I hope to see you next week. So are there any questions? Dan just put something in the chat. I will pull it up. Ah, the diving response. The diving response in reducing panic symptoms. Excellent. Are there any questions? Because we just finished with 5 minutes to spare. I don't believe it. I'm notorious for going over time. So I've got some optional homework for you. First of all, I'm going to send you the links to the training for emotional intelligence and managing conflict. I will also send you the student manuals for those. I recommend that you do a little bit of research in those training videos and manuals because they give you a lot more information about things that we just touched upon briefly today, especially emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is one of the best techniques for managing yourself, along with being a component of that is really essential to career success, especially in leadership roles. Research shows time and time again that strong leaders have strong emotional intelligence. And then also I will offer you the opportunity to do one-on-one reviews of your DISC Plus. If you want to set up a time with me to go over it, I'd be happy to do that with you next week. And again, I'll send you emails on that. So are there any more questions before we break for the day? Thank you, Joyce. I appreciate your participation. I'm going to strongly recommend that that if you really want to put the results of your DISC Plus to use, that we have that one-on-one, because today I was just able to scratch the surface, just enough to make you dangerous. And also, if there are people in your organization who you would like to have take the DISC Plus, just let me know, and I'll let them take it. Thank you. Thank you all for your kind words and your great participation. And if I might see you at First Fridays in Havre de Grace, hopefully. And otherwise, I'm a working musician as well as this, so I have a gig in Columbia on Saturday. So that's where I'll be spending most of my weekend, preparing and performing. Other than that, have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, Andy. See you Friday.
Okay, see ya.